Buonasera, good evening. And welcome to the 10th Walter Lippmann Memorial Oration. My name is Emiliano Zucchi. I'm the CEO of the Ethnic Communities Council of Victoria. Many thanks for braving this hostile weather to join us for this important event tonight. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners in Italian, the language I share with our distinguished speaker tonight, the Honorable Tony Pagone. Nello spirito di riconciliazione, ICCV riconosce i custodi tradizionali del territorio in tutta Australia e il loro legame con la terra e le acque e le comunità. Rendiamo omaggio ai loro anziani, passati e presenti, ed estendiamo oggi questo rispetto a tutte le persone aborigine e indigene e delle isole dello Stretto di Torres presenti. I take this opportunity to thank our sponsor, Language Loop, for providing the translation of the acknowledgement, as well as sponsoring this event. Thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to welcome the chairperson of the Ethnic Communities Council of Victoria's board, Eddie Micallef, who will be leading proceedings. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to the 10th Walter Lippmann Memorial Oration. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land in which we meet, and I pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and any other First Nations people here tonight. This is the 10th oration, and about 7 of them have been in this hall, and I've been to every one of them so far, so I'm keeping my record alive. I'd also like to acknowledge our distinguished speaker tonight, Gaetano Tony Pagone. Welcome, Tony. The Consul General of Italy, Hannah Pappalardo, is that right? Thank you. The current members of the ECCV board, you're here. Thank you for supporting us. Former members of the ECCV board. And we did have one coming, I don't know whether it's Shirai Bruno Pasqua, another Italian who was to be with us tonight. Viv Nguyen, Chair of the VMC. Viv, welcome and thank you again for supporting. I understand you're a former associate of our speaker, so that makes it a little bit good. Members of the Lippmann family, and I understand there's some direct descendants here tonight from the Lippmann family, so welcome. I also like to acknowledge and thank our sponsors, Language Loop, Chairperson Professor Kathy Laster, thank you, CEO George Bisset, and other members of Language Loop board that are here tonight. And a real heartfelt thank you, Language Loop, for supporting this event again. So that's very much appreciated. Before I continue on behalf of the board, I want to extend my thanks to the ECCV board who continue with their excellent support in turning up and doing all the arrangement which makes these functions work like clockwork. So once again, thank you very much, staff. This event is held each year in honour of one of the ECCV founders, Walter Lippmann, who was a strong advocate for multiculturalism and multicultural communities, not only within Victoria, but throughout Australia. And I think that's pretty important. Born in Hamburg, Walter Lippmann fled Nazi Germany and settled in Melbourne in 1938 as a 19-year-old and became a prominent leader of Melbourne's Jewish community and was one of the pioneering ethnic leaders who established the ECCV nearly 50 years ago. It's 50 years next year. He was also the first chair, and along with people like Giovanni Scro from the Italian community, professor, and who else? George Langalis from the Greek community, and a number of others, Alan Matheson, and a whole range of other people. I must say, even though Walter was a driving force, you don't do it without a team behind you, and I know that as chair of this organisation, you have to have the support to bring about the success that comes with that. The inaugural Walter Lippmann oration was launched in 2011, and it was supported strongly by our then patron, the Right Honourable Malcolm Fraser, former Prime Minister of Australia, and a very strong supporter of multiculturalism and of the ECCV. So that was great that we had that recognition. It has become a forum, this oration become a forum for eminent Australians from all walks of life to reflect on contemporary multiculturalism and our vision for a more equitable society, one that is truly representative of who we are as a nation. Former speakers have included, the last one was Professor Marcia Langton, Michael Kirby, Tim South Pomasani, Gillian Triggs, Julian Burnside, Lindsay Tanner, Arnold Zabel, Indira Naidu, and I can't think of one more that makes up the 10. Tonight we're privileged to have as our distinguished speaker the Honourable Tony Pagone, AMKC. Tony is an eminent Australian lawyer and former judge of the Federal Court of Australia and the Supreme Court of Victoria. Earlier this year, he was appointed as a member of the Order of Australia for his significant service to the law and to the judiciary and to professional associations. Tony has been active in the Italian community. He was founding counsel of the Australian Institute and served 4 years as president of COASID. And COASID, as we know, has been a very strong voice for the Italian community in this state. The ECC is proud that the special milestone oration is being delivered by a former leader of one of our founding member organisations. And we can also feel proud that it's being delivered by a proud son of Italian immigrants who has reached the height of his profession and made a remarkable contribution to our society. And look, that's great that this happens, and I think we should acknowledge that in the way it should be acknowledged. Tony epitomises the success and aspiration of Australian multiculturalism. Professor Cathy Lester, I am Chair of Language Loop. Before we hear from Tony, it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Cathy Lester to say a few words on behalf of the sponsor tonight, to Language Loop. Cathy was appointed Chair of Language Loop in November 2020. She is a former Director of Victorian University Sir Zelman Cowen Centre, which specialises in law. Cathy's career includes senior leadership and roles in law reform, international through leaders in succession to justice, multiculturalism and social inclusion. In 2022, Cathy was honoured with an AM for her significant service to the law and advisory bodies. Please welcome Cathy.
Thank you very much, and I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. And I won't go through all the VIPs because Eddie has done that admirably, and everyone here is a VIP. I would like to make one comment about the acknowledgements. Language Loop has translated those now into 35 or more languages, and it's really heartening to see the uptake by communities, newly arrived communities, who really want to be able to express their sense of place. So we have those available, and please let it be known, because it's a terrific connection between old and the new place of residence. I'm thrilled and honoured to be here tonight because I am the chair of Wits Language Loop, which is a fabulous organisation. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. I'm also thrilled because Tony Pagone, who is a colleague and a dear friend in the law, is delivering this oration, and I'm really looking forward to everything that he has to say, as usual. And finally, I have a personal connection to Walter Lippmann. Having said that, I should also say that I don't usually overshare. But after the whole Tampa episode and the way in which refugees and asylum seekers are disparaged and put down, and many of us who have a refugee background started to say we have to also come out of the closet because it's not the stereotypes. We make a contribution in the longer term. So we started to not be quite so shy about talking about our origins. So if you'll allow me, I will tell you a little bit, which will get me to Walter Lippmann. I was born in July of 1956 in Hungary, in Budapest. And for those of you who know their history, that was smack bang in the middle of the Hungarian Revolution. In December, when I was 5 months old, my mother was killed in that revolution. My father left very quickly while he still could get out, and I was brought up by my grandmother. And we eventually got to Australia when I was 6. My grandmother, at the time that she got the care of a 5-month-old, was significantly older than I am now, in a Hungarian winter under the sort of Soviet regime. I didn't make too many inquiries about how it was that we got out after 6 years, until one day, and we have to fast forward 20 or more years, and I was talking at an event for the Jewish community, and a very distinguished gentleman came over to me, and he introduced himself, but the only question he was interested in was, "And how is your remarkable grandmother?" who at that stage was in her 90s and still very much with it. And so I told him, and we had a discussion about my grandmother. And so after that event, I made some inquiries as to why the head of Jewish welfare, as it then was, knew about my grandmother and me. And turns out that Walter, in one of his many trips to Canberra, had carried our dossier with him and lobbied the Australian government, not only for a visa for us, but also to lobby the Hungarian government to let us out, which in those days was quite a complex business. So I have to say, and I say that to the family who are here, that I am really here, and I'm most grateful for the advocacy of Walter Lippmann, and I know that I'm not alone, both as an individual and as families, and also, as we've heard from Eddie, this was something that he did more broadly for communities and to make sure that ethnic communities were well represented. So let me also say a little bit about interpreting. I was a child interpreter for my grandmother, certainly, and there are some quite funny stories as well as sad stories about that, but for my father and my stepmother and my extended family. And I reflected on that experience, and I don't think it's a role for children. I don't think they should be privy to the sorts of stories that I had to be privy to. It was a huge responsibility, and it certainly distorts family relationships. So I, in my own little way, was very interested in developing professional interpreting services, and as an academic I wrote on and how we could do that. And I am a champion of skilled professional interpreting and translation services, which brings us to Wits Language Loop, which is the government provider of wonderful professional interpreting and translation services, 24/7 in every language you can imagine, 130 plus languages. I think a government provider is significant. It is the ultimate safety net which protects against market failure. As we saw during COVID, as we saw during bushfires, as we may see now again in floods, and it invests back into the sector. So you need a professional service and advocacy organisation that can lift standards and indeed take seriously the remuneration of interpreters to make sure that the industry is locally sustainable, because it will face significant disruption internationally. Wits Language Loop is a proud leader in the sector, and we are indeed taking that role very seriously. And one of the reasons that we are the sponsor of this event and many others is because we see the merit in an advocacy organisation that understands and represents the needs of diverse communities. So, it was wonderful that I had this opportunity to overshare, and I again thank ECCV for the honour and for the opportunity to talk to you, and I'm really looking forward to my friend's address, which I know will be wonderful. And I said I wouldn't do his introduction because I might do a roast. We know each other that well. So, Tony.
Well, thank you, Kathy, and thank you to Language Loop. It's wonderful to hear about your connections that so many of us share, and once again, thank you for your support. I'd like to say a few more words about our speaker tonight. Born in Melbourne, Tony Pagani is the son of Sicilian immigrants who established a well-known Italian pastry shop in North Melbourne. A lot of my Maltese forebears lived in North Melbourne and probably went to your pastry shop, Tony. In the 1960s, he graduated from Monash University in 1979 with a Bachelor of Laws from Cambridge University and a Master of Law in 1983. He was appointed Queen's Counsel for Victoria in 1996 and practiced widely in taxation law, commercial law, administrative law, constitutional law, public and human rights law during his career at the bar. He was first appointed to the Supreme Court in 2001 at the age of 46, and the youngest person to be appointed at that time. He was a special counsel to the Commissioner of Taxation before returning to the Supreme Court in 2007. In 2013, he was appointed to the Federal Court of Australia, coordinating judge of the Taxation National Practice Area until his retirement. In 2014, he was awarded an LLD, Director of Law, from the University of Melbourne. And Tony has also served on the Victorian Council of Civil Liberties, the Victorian Equal Opportunity Board and the Victorian Executive Committee of Amnesty International and the Luke Batty Foundation and the Alan Messon Foundation. In 2019, he was appointed as Commissioner to the Royal Commission into Aged Care, Quality and Safety, which has led to important reform to Australia's aged care system, and it was well needed. For the past 4 years, he has served as President of the International Association of Judges, the first Australian to hold that position. Tony's journey has been absolutely inspirational, and his contribution more than I can touch on tonight. It is now my great honour to invite Tony to deliver the 10th Walter Lippmann Memorial Oration. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you, Eddie, and thank you, Kathy. With that introduction, I'm tempted to go home. Things could only get worse after that. Walter Lippmann is the reason that we are here today. We're here to remember publicly the person and his legacy. Public remembrance allows us to reflect on who we are and who we would like to be. In part, our multicultural community is made up of pieces, to use the word that Tim Costello, that was the one you missed, the first the person to give these lectures, used. And one crucial piece of who we are is the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. We begin such meetings by acknowledging, as I do now, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. In doing so, however, it is important that the acknowledgement does not become an empty token, but continues as a public reminder of our past and of the debts that we owe to the traditional owners of the land, which we enjoy and have moulded as our own. The Uluru Statement from the Heart is a powerful reminder that we stand upon the land taken from a people who did not cede it and it was not lost in a war. It was taken on the conveniently erroneous basis that the land was simply unoccupied, vacant and available for possession. Terra nullius. Giving the traditional owners a voice in the Constitution is an important step for our identity as a society with multi-cultures in which the traditional owners are preeminent. The treatment of our First Nation members must be the bleakest part of our multicultural story. As a barrister, I came to act for a woman who had been part of the stolen generation, and I came to learn something about the tragic consequences of misguided good intentions imposed upon others. She, like too many others, had been taken from her mother as a young child. The written notes by the person with the task of taking the child from the mother recorded that the mother had tried to prevent her child from being taken, and indeed on one occasion, one attempt was not successful because the child was unwell and needed the mother's care. The brutality of the forced separation is not made more palatable by the belief that those taking the children thought that they were doing something in the best interest of the child, nor by the knowledge that this child, who subsequently became my client, had gone on to have a comfortable life, judged by contemporary standards, and had herself had a loving family. There is much that's still to be done in the process of meaningful recognition of the traditional owners by the wider Australian community, and in making good for the future what has happened in the past. That must also include an assumption of responsibility for the future by all of us who enjoy the benefits of this land today. The effects of past deeds linger, and those of us who enjoy today what the past allows us to enjoy have some duty to make good on past mistakes. The relationship between the wider Australian community and its First Nation members is not just a series of individual mistakes. It has been a relationship of systemic dysfunction that has continued. It continued to be evident to me in my work on the Royal Commission into aged care, as the aged care needs of our First Nation people continue to be inadequately understood or provided for. The evidence we heard was of elderly First Nation Australians continuing to feel mistrust of institutions and seeking support that was appropriate for them. We largely ignore still the deep-seated mistrust that our community has instilled amongst our First Nation members by years of dysfunctional policies in lives attended by domestic abuse, poverty, substance abuse, official mistreatment, and deaths in custody. The evidence before the Commission was that we were no better at serving that group when they, already vulnerable, became even more vulnerable with old age and infirmities. Walter Lippmann is a pivotal figure in our identity as a multicultural society. He, like many Australians, was not a native of this country. He was born, as we've heard, on the 19th of September 1919 in Hamburg, Germany, into a prosperous and distinguished Jewish family. In September 1938, at the age of about 19 seems to figure a lot in Lippmann's life, he left for Melbourne at a time when his family could no longer see a future in their home in Germany. We can only imagine the hardship, the anguish and difficulty for him to leave a country in which his family, for generations, had been important and respected leaders. The Lippmanns had not been transitory travellers passing through Hamburg with no lasting commitment to the place they happened to live. They had made it their home and had developed deep roots. His father was a successful businessman, and his uncle Leo, a lawyer, had been state councillor overseeing the city's finances before the Nazi regime. All this was left behind by his journey to Melbourne in September 1938 to start a new life in a distant land, amongst others with different ways. He was followed in December by his parents, brother, sister and grandmother, with travel permits obtained through an Australian business contact of his father's, a bit like Kathy. The story of Walter Lippmann in Australia is one of personal success, but also of substantial service and of lasting contribution to a new world with different people from different places. Australia became the place in which he had a family, worked and lived with others. After the war, he established successful business ventures, fitting businesses, together with his father. On 15 February 1943, he had married Lorna Mattinson, a graduate from the University of Melbourne, and both husband and wife were active in community service and in public duty. In 1948, he was appointed Honorary Secretary of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry and later had significant roles in the Victorian Jewish Board of Deputies and the Australian Welfare and Relief Society. Their interests, however, broadened beyond their own community. Lorna joined the Victorian Aboriginal Advancement League and was its Vice President from 1958 to 1968. In 1964, she became the convener of the Legislative Reform Committee of the Federal Council for the Advancement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Walter was active in ethnic affairs and came to be a critic of Australia's then assimilation policy, advocating instead for a policy called multiculturalism. He was a member of the Commonwealth Immigration Advisory Council from 1967 to 1974 and chaired its Committee on Community Relations between 1974 and 1975. Significantly for this occasion, he helped establish the Ethnic Communities Council of Victoria and was its chair from 1974 to 1983. Walter Lippmann's commitment to ethnic community lives on as a beacon for us all to see and in which to find guidance. We have much to learn from his vision and from his example. As the tasks that he advocated remain, they are ongoing and they are monumental. We justifiably celebrate the work of Lippmann on these occasions, but an oration in his honour should not be an occasion for complacent self-congratulations. It is rather an occasion to reflect upon the importance of the task and on how much more there is still to do. This audience, partly as we've heard, knows the meaning of multiculturalism in the context of this country and knows why it is important for it to be a principal feature of a shared reality. But its meaning and importance may not be known to everyone, and our task must be in part to extend the knowledge and importance of multiculturalism to deepen our understanding of what it means in modern Australia and to increase our shared commitment to a society enriched by difference, diversity and by acceptance. There has been much written and many studies undertaken about the dynamics and tensions between groups and between outsiders and insiders and between people with differences. I am not an expert in any of those fields and shall confine myself to what I have experienced living in Australia as the child of migrants and later as a lawyer. At the first of these occasions, two speakers, the Honourable Malcolm Fraser and the Reverend Tim Costello, both remarked upon the importance of ethnic migration to this country. Migration is the source of our ethnic mix and is crucial to our economy as a source of labour. We also receive migrants through other means, including by the discharge of our international humanitarian duties to refugees and asylum seekers. the constant arrival of others from different places means that we as a community will be joined by others who need to be made welcome, accommodated and treated fairly. Our history of dealing with people we bring to this country to support our economy has not been good. In the 19th century, labourers were brought from the South Sea Islands, referred to inappropriately and generally as Kanaks, under conditions that were indefensible and who were treated subsequently as though their families and themselves did not matter. We still rely upon foreign workers to underpin important aspects of our economy, including in agriculture and aged care, and expect that the workers, sometimes euphemistically called guest workers, will leave our shores happily after they have been of use to us. Some wish to return to their original homes, some wish to remain, and some we want to stay. But in every case, the people we bring in to work in our economy are not just stocks in manufacture. They are rather, and those to whom we give shelter are not just inconvenient obligations undertaken to appease our conscience. They are and become part of us and bring with them their own hopeful expectations, as well as different experiences, different attitudes, and different ways of living. Each comes with a rich, personal and individual past, which is as rich, personal and complex as every person who is already here. As a community, we must understand the needs of those we include amongst our number, as well as our own needs, and we need to embrace those differences. Our embracement of difference is essential as we inevitably continue to live with others from different backgrounds and continue to receive new additions to our community from other places. That, I think, is the key message of the multiculturalism advocated by Walter Lippmann. We do well to look back and reflect upon how much we have changed by the ethnic mix of this country and how much it has enriched us. The adoption of difference and diversity has brought us rewards by creating the rich fabric in which we live. Everywhere we care to look, we see the meaningful contribution of people who were once outsiders. Migrants, refugees, their children and their families have all contributed to the making of the vibrant, affluent and safe environment in which we prosper. The Italian community is one example of a group which individually and collectively has contributed significantly and visibly to the rich diversity we enjoy today. The Consul can be very proud. I refer not only to the obvious additions to food and coffee, but to the different aspects of our society that makes its fabric. There have been builders, architects, doctors, scholars, lawyers, judges, one state governor, and I regret to say, even one commissioner of taxation. These achievements are all important, both as a sign of success, but also as proof of belonging. It matters to others in each ethnic group that one of theirs has achieved a position of importance recognised by the dominant community. In law enforcement and administration, it is important that those enforcing the rules and dispensing justice are seen as part of us, our people, and not as others requiring our compliance with foreign norms. In medicine, it is crucial that health messages and medical treatment be administered in ways that understand the different cultures of the patient. In the community generally, it is essential that all are seen to participate as leaders and as members of the whole. The gains we have made over the years have not been without scars and trauma to many, and we need to tell the story of those scars and traumas as well as to celebrate the successes. Difference and diversity are not always seen as positives, even by those who those in the dominant community, might see as different. There are many stories of migrant children, for example, who feel distance, alienation, and shame of their families and of themselves as they navigate between their family's culture and the Australian world in which they find themselves. The children of migrants seek to be accepted and to be seen as Australian, whatever that might mean, and to do so in part by rejection of their heritage and of those who love them. The opportunity to give this oration has, understandably, caused me to reflect upon how different things look now for Italian Australians than they did to me as an Italian migrant child growing up. It is fair to say that I have been lucky with my life's path, being the child of Italian migrants growing up in the 1960s, when it was not as fashionable then as it seems to be today. It is important to recall one's own traumas to understand something of that of others today. For many children of migrants, there was and is a deep sense of shame and rejection of family bonds. Elsewhere, I have written about how at school I came to have imposed upon me the anglicised name of Tony as a substitute for, and I suppose some approximation of, the name which had been given proudly to me by my parents. It is a small thing in the scheme of things and might even have been an advantage. But it leads me to think about the many others for whom the difference and rejection has not been so benign. I can clearly recall the racist taunts in the school playground and think about the anguish of others as they gather scars in living life in a society that does not adequately adopt the message of multiculturalism. The achievement of so many from different ethnic groups are important indicators also of the strength of the community as a whole. A strong community can be seen by how easily it can embrace others who are different and with whom they do not agree. Not every value or every practice that comes with a new arrival will fit easily or at all in a liberal democracy. Some who come here will bring values and practices which an Australian liberal democracy in the 21st century will not tolerate. Those values are often tied with the treatment of women and vulnerable children, and our interference with those values and practices is necessary to protect those who cannot protect themselves or who are nonetheless vulnerable, even though the interference will cause other problems within those communities and those family units. But the essential feature of multiculturalism must be to accommodate as much as possible the differences of those who join us, just as we accept as much as possible the difference that we all have. There was once a then well-known debate between Professor Hart and Lord Devlin about the right of society to interfere in the private lives of its members. It was a debate around the decriminalisation of homosexuality, with Professor Hart advocating the liberal view of John Stuart Mill that the individual should be free from any restraint to engage in self-regarding conduct. Lord Devlin had a different view. For him, society could interfere with individual freedom where the conduct threatened its moral fabric. Whatever you might think of Lord Devlin's approach, it would seem to follow as a matter of logic that a mark of a strong society is one that remains confident in the face of challenge. We rightly celebrate diversity and inclusion in principle, but these can be difficult to accommodate in practice, as some recent issues around religious freedom has shown. Diversity is not just about increasing the different ways in which we make coffee or enjoying more films on SBS. It has an internal conflict that brings and needs resolution by accommodation. Having diversity of people means having differences which conflict with each other, and we need means to accommodate those conflicts in ways that are truly inclusive. That necessarily means being inclusive of views and practices that some of us do not like. We cannot open our doors to people with different cultures and then disenfranchise them from effective and full participation. It is a simple reality that the views and practices of some will conflict with and be deeply hurtful to others. The accommodation of those differences, often irreconcilable, is a crucial part of a multicultural society. The law and its judges have important roles to play in guaranteeing diversity and equality, and therefore the people appointed need themselves to be reflective of the broader community. All who come here to make this their home are entitled to feel safe, be treated equally, and have a sense of belonging. The law should be known, predictable, and acceptable to all equally, and those who apply the law must be independent and free from interference, but must also be reflective of the community they are appointed to serve. Welfare, peace, order, and prosperity depend upon individuals being confident that the law applies equally to all and that it will be applied equally and fairly to all. The rule of law requires a judiciary that is independent and that it be administered by people who are different from those who make it. It requires also that judges make decisions independently from external interference and that they apply principles that are objective and known and not personal or private to the judge. The role of the judge in the application of the law is to apply objective and impersonal rules by reference to objective criteria and upon evidence that can be tested. The rule of law and independent judiciary are fundamental to preserving diversity, but there need also to be visible inclusion and participation. The application of the law upon us should not seem like an imposition by others, but as an application of the law by us to us. Those who hold judicial office and positions in other institutions should broadly reflect the community they serve, but the figures do not show us doing well on that score. The number of women now on the High Court may exceed 50%, but its composition and that of all of our courts is not otherwise particularly diverse when compared to the demography of Australia's population. The Australian Bureau of Statistics media release of 23 April 2021 recorded that as of June 2020, 30% of people living in Australia had been born overseas, compared with 28% in 2015 and 27% in 2011. That's a high proportion. Of these, the single largest group had been, as you'd expect, in England. But the other 9 countries of origin in the top 10, in order of proportion, were India, China, not counting special administrative regions in Taiwan, New Zealand, Philippines, Vietnam, South Africa, Italy, Malaysia, and Sri Lanka. The composition of our courts and other institutions does not reflect this diversity in our country. Diversity is important. It engenders public trust, and it is a tangible demonstration of inclusion, participation, belonging, and commitment. It brings also to the administration of justice an understanding of the people who come to the courts for justice. A recent appointee of the United States Supreme Court said during that judge's confirmation process, "When I get a case about discrimination, I have to think about people in my own family who suffer discrimination because of their ethnic background, or because of religion, or because of gender, and I do take that into account." The nominee went on to add, "My father was brought into this country as an infant, grew up in poverty, and could not get a job as a teacher due to the discriminatory hiring practices prevalent at the time." I was required, as a judge of the Federal Court of Australia, to decide many migration cases of people who were no longer eligible to remain in this country. The law did not permit me to substitute my private views for those of the minister, the minister's delegate, or the reviewing tribunal. But in each and every case, I felt the anguish that I might imagine my family might feel as migrants being told that their hopes for a better life in this country would not be realised. My life experience did not alter the application of the law, but it gave me some understanding of what my application meant for those affected. We have been lucky in this country to enjoy a stable system of law and government with independent judges applying the rule of law. That is not the case everywhere. Individual judges sometimes pay a high price for applying the law made by others. Many here may remember the graphic images of the two mafia killings of Judge Falcone and Judge Borsellino in Italy. Both were killed a few months apart in 1992, and both were awarded posthumous gold medals for civic valour for their efforts and sacrifice during the anti-mafia trials. However, there is a plaque in a court in Milan with a list of other judges whose lives have been taken by the criminal underworld. These others did not die in as dramatic circumstances as Falcone and Borsellino, and their deaths and their names on a plaque are largely forgotten in public memory. Some of those now in Australia have come from and may still have links with places where to be a judge today in applying the rule of law with independence is done at personal risk. In December 2015, a judge in Yemen and his two children were assassinated whilst driving. The judge had been the president of the Specialised Anti-Terrorism Criminal Court investigating cases against Al-Qaeda, including those accused of bombing the US warship and a French oil tanker. In 2016, we saw judges arrested in Turkey and the disbanding of the Association of Judges in that country. Some of those arrested belonged to the Turkish Association of Judges, which at the time was a member of the International Association of Judges, of which at the time I was a vice president. One of those judges sent an email after being released from detention saying that he had been shown no evidence against him except his name on a list. His email ended by stating simply that he was no longer a judge. The last email received from the then president of the Turkish Association of Judges was short and said only, "Now my wife and I have been detained. Full stop. Goodbye. Full stop." In more recent times, we've seen pressures placed upon the independence of judges in Poland and, I regret to say, in Hungary. My point is not to make their case today, but to point to the depth of experience that your organisations can call upon to demonstrate the importance of diversity and the dangers when we are less accepting of difference. The need for our communities to have a voice is at every level of activity and continues into old age. The needs of older Australians from diverse backgrounds were frequent messages during the Royal Commission into Aged Care. The general finding of neglect recorded in the interim report had its specific face, or rather faces, when it came to the systems dealing with diversity. Older Australians from different backgrounds bring with them, as they age, the differences they carry with them. The needs of older Australians are not all the same or unspecific. They are moulded to the individual and are as different, diverse and unique as each of us know ourselves to be here today. It is another area in which those here tonight have an important position as the voice for others. Diversity in a multicultural society matters. It matters fundamentally in preserving the commitment of all to our well-being. We all need to feel that we belong and are committed to the place we make as our home. A sense of belonging and of commitment is undermined when we coerce others to be like others. It should concern us deeply that the views and practices of some of us will conflict and be hurtful to others. But it should also be deeply concerning to us that those views and practices that we do not like are excluded from participation in our society. These concerns are not new, and their resolution is not easy. We must, of course, ensure that the views and practices of some do not cause harm to others, but the harm to be prevented cannot be at the cost of harm to those whose views and practices we do not like. We harm them when our objection to their views and practices denies their participation in the community that claims to have embraced them. They are harmed when they must conceal themselves just as much as others were forced to conceal themselves until relatively recently, as many still do. They are harmed, and we are harmed, when they cannot take public or important positions for which they are qualified and can perform without in turn imposing their will upon those of us with different views. This is as true when the harm is done by legal force as much as when it is done by public or private coercion. It should concern us deeply that the recent exclusion of an individual from a high-profile position may mean that others that we have ostensibly embraced as part of us may not feel able to offer themselves for similar positions, or must hide from view, or will be rejected when asking for inclusion. That is not multiculturalism. The difficult task is how to ensure that our society is multicultural. In that task, the multicultural community has a vital role to play in the public remembrance of why diversity is important and why we must accommodate things in others we do not like in ourselves. Multiculturalism is strengthened when we stand with those with whom we do not agree, and we have a rich source of experiences from which to draw in the public remembrance of embracing diversity by accommodating difference rather than by suppressing them. I thank you for your attention.